Ganz herzlich willkommen. Ich begrüße Sie im Namen der deutschen.
I would like to welcome you on behalf of the German Council on Foreign Relations and the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees to our discussion. So a warm welcome. We don't really have to say that because it's quite warm at the moment. I hope you have a ventilator or some other AC. And the topic we will be talking about is not a cold one either. So it's about gender and exit work from Islamist extremism, perspectives from civil society, law enforcement, and international research. So many of you work in this field, and some of you might only be interested, and maybe some statistics, which was also included in the invitation, i.e. the conclusion that approximately 20% of the Germans who joined the so-called IS were women. This is one thing, but gender doesn't mean women, but gender means roles and images of roles. So this is why we want to look into masculinity and femininity in the context of extremism and the relevance for practical work on the one hand, for law enforcement on the one hand, and also the perspective of research on the other hand. Now, in terms of the technical aspects, I assume this is not your first webinar. So we have a very classic webinar subdivision. So we have some speakers who will, in the beginning, give you a short input that will be recorded. And we would like to publish this afterwards as well. The discussion and the questions and answers will not be recorded, however. And this should facilitate an open exchange. Nevertheless, we kindly ask you, even though this will not be recorded, to follow the Chatham House rules, i.e. you can talk about what has been said, but please do not allocate it to a name. So if you want to say like, Mr. Ritzman said this, that, and the other, then contact the respective person. So we want to have a safe space also in the virtual world for an exchange that it goes beyond distributing functional positions. We always try to do that with InFoEx. You can see that there's a globe below. So this webinar will be taking place in German primarily. However, I will, with our speaker, Dr. Freund, I will be speaking English with her, and you can just select the language that you would like to follow this event in. And everything will be simultaneously interpreted by our competent colleagues. Now we can get started. I would like to pass the floor to Sofia Koller. She's a research fellow here at the German Council on Foreign Relations, and she's the project leader, International Forum for Expert Exchange on Countering Islamist Extremism, InFoEx. So yeah, thank goodness we have this abbreviation, InFoEx. Sophia, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander. And I will actually switch back to English because we're having a recording for the first minutes of our input. And I just prefer to have the original voice. I will very quickly share my screen because I will say some sentences about the project and also the relevance of today's topic. So again, a warm welcome from my side. Of course, we would have loved to welcome you at DGAP and also then have a discussion on our garden with this warm weather. That would have been especially nice. But I think we're getting there. So for now, bear with us as we are having this virtual discussion. And very quickly, as Alexander mentioned, I'm leading the project InFoEx. Yes, we found after some thinking a nice and handy abbreviation. And about the project itself, we started in 2018. It's a cooperation of DGAP, the German Council on Foreign Relations, with the Federal Agency for Migration and Refugees, the BAMF, and is financed by the Federal Ministry of the Interior. And also at this stage, I would extend warm welcome to the representatives of those two organizations, our partners. And I've seen also already Verena Ricken and Alexandra Wielopolski-Kazako. So happy to have you here today. And basically what we want to do with this project is to foster international knowledge exchange on tertiary prevention of Islamist extremism with the civil society and governmental partners that are working in Germany on this topic, and provide, this is the role of DGAP especially, provide international expertise on the topics that we choose. Very quickly, what we do, or what we have done in the past 3 years and are still doing, is that first we identify trends in tertiary prevention of work in Germany and abroad. Then we share good practice and also challenges in international workshops. And then we process and communicate these findings in issue papers in publications that you can also find on our website, both in English and in German. The most recent one is touching upon the issue of risk assessment. The upcoming one is talking about recidivism. But so far, for now, and these workshops that we're organizing are exclusively for our network members. And we're happy to have this kind of, trustful exchange amongst them. But we find it very important to discuss that topic of our project also with the wider public. And that's why we said that after some of the workshops, we want to deepen and further discuss the topic of the workshop with the broader public. So the workshops that we had in April was focusing on the role of women in prevention. And so now this discussion today will broaden this topic, and we will talk more broadly about the role of gender in general in radicalization processes, but also very specifically in exit work. So the question of how can we support individuals to exit the extremist structure or ideology that they have in their life until then. And so that's why before starting with the inputs of our esteemed guest speakers, I would like to share some insights that we have discussed during this workshop to give you an idea what we're talking about, and also provide an insight on the broad range of topics that come to mind when talking about the role of women in prevention work. So very general, we discussed that, yes, there is an improved understanding of the role of women in political violence, Islamist extremism, and in prevention in general, but there are still, there's still a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes about this topic, which makes it really clear that we need this kind of discussion that we're holding here today, also from an international perspective. Second, yes, the recruitment into extremist structures is quite similar between men and women, but our participants stress that topics and location might differ. So, for example, women might be recruited more through chat groups, while male more through public space. Then also the process of inmates moving through the prison structures is also quite similar, at least in Germany, but there is much less experience with prison management of women that are part of extremism. There's, for example, a lack of mother-child structures or a lack of religious support. And finally, what I found especially interesting is that when we speak about counseling in exit work, it's not necessarily needed that a woman is counseled by a woman or a man counseled by a man, but there are more approaches to it. It depends on the staff, on the person. There can be disadvantages and advantages. But I'm sure that our expert will dive deeper into these kind of aspects and what they think about and to discuss this controversially. And then second aspect that I would like to share is that, of course, and Alexander mentioned this in his introduction, is that especially the relatively high number of women that have joined the so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq and that have returned or might return in the future has really, shed light on the importance of the role of women in extremist structures, and has really encouraged the discussion on their roles. While it's not only about female returnees, they are still a big part of this discussion. So what we found is that it's not only important to differentiate between male and female foreign fighters or returnees, but more specifically, what is the role? So has, for example, a woman a very active role in Syria or more passive role? Because this also influences the exit process. Then what we found is that the people that are still staying in the camps in northern Syria, the long stays and the dark conditions there might contribute to them feeling that I'm only a victim. I didn't really do anything wrong, which might also hinder then the discussion on a possible criminal behavior on their part. Again, these are not general always valid statements, but these are experiences from our participants that they shared from their work. And then especially something that we might discuss today is that there seems to be less evidence to charge and prosecute female returnees, partly because, for example, they might be covered their faces in the few instances that they appear on media, for example, as opposed to men. So there is less evidence to be used in court. And then in exit work, what I found interesting also is that it seems to be that the different roles that female returnees is more complex, because they're not only like men coming back alone, where sometimes they don't even know where their children are, but they have also, in many cases, the role of mother that has to be taken into account. For example, when a female returnee receives a prison sentence, and then the question is, can she still see her child, especially in the COVID conditions, for example. And finally, there seems to be quite a number of female returnees that express the wish to work with children or in the social sector once they have, reintegrated to some sort. So when discussing future plans in exit work, which is also a part of exit work, these might be unrealistic plans. And the question is how do we deal with these kind of future plans in exit work and still provide some sort of future outlook for them. So far from now, I hope it really encourages the discussion, brings in a new perspective. And now I'm really looking forward to the discussion with our speakers. And of course, you, the participants. And I'm happy to hand back over to Alexander. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Sophia, für diese Setzung eines Rahmens.
Thank you very much, Sophia, for setting the frame here, which tells us what we have been doing so far within InFoEx. I mean, our experts are not bound by this, but we will start with this part where we explicitly want to hear our three experts for them to shed some light on their topics. You read it in the invitation. We have Dr. Freund, Dr. Moldenhauer, and Mrs. Fati. And we would like to hear the inputs first, and then have a discussion amongst us, and then as early as possible, and also depends on you, the more you use the Q&A feature, the earlier we will be able to integrate this into our exchange. So you don't have to wait until all inputs have been made. If you have statements or questions, please use this format the way you want to use it. I will now switch to English.
Dr. Aya Mortag Freund. She's a special consultant with the Danish Center for Prevention of Extremism for the Ministry for Immigration and Integration in Denmark. Aya has worked with us before at InFoEx as an expert, so we're double happy that she's with us again. So please, Aya, go ahead and share your insights with us.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander, and thank you, Sophia, for the introduction. I'm very pleased to be here again. As you also said, it could have been nice to sit in Berlin, but we'll do that some other time. As you said, Alexander, I am part of the Danish National Center for Prevention of Extremism, and I primarily work with counseling of the Danish municipalities on early prevention of extremism. And then I am the coordinator of our national team of mentors and parent coaches. And that is primarily what I will address today, later on in the dialogue and in the discussion. But I'm sure going to take you through some of the basic aspects on working with prevention of extremism from a Danish context, and then also for the national team of mentors and parent coaches. Well, the Danish approach to the prevention of extremism is based on the notion that extremism has a multitude of negative consequences. Not only does it result in, of course, terrorist attacks and violence and threats and vandalism and other hate-motivated crimes, but it can also, and very much do so, harm people's social well-being and democratic formation. So there is not only a need for working with prevention of terrorism from a safety perspective, but first and foremost to work with early prevention of extremism from a social well-being perspective. And at the Danish Center, we do primarily work with the early prevention perspective in relation to the social well-being, and with an understanding of extremism being not only extreme Islamism, but also looking upon extreme right-wing and extreme left-wing. So among many of the initiatives that we've been working with over the last 5-6 years, we have since 2015 been educating mentors and parent coaches all over Denmark. And the purpose of this national team of mentors and parent coaches is to provide a preventive and supportive program to municipalities aimed at individuals where there is a concern in relation to extremism. And the purpose of having local municipality-based mentors and parent coaches is to support a handheld intervention, both in preventive, but also regarding to exit in a municipal context. So the team is aimed at or works with individuals who are first and foremost involved in extremist environments, are exhibiting specific concern, exhibiting specific concerning signs in relation to radicalization, or even exhibit vulnerability, even mentally or socially, to being attracted to extremist environments and or ideologies. You can see that's the very early preventive effort. We also work with their parents or relatives, and we work with, of course, both men and women and young and old. It sort of covers the entire spectrum. The team applies a method that we use called solution-focused work on life skills, and I'm going to go deeper into that later on. And the purpose of the method is to help people get a good enough grip on their own and common life. It's based on psychological aspects as well as signs of safety, which many of you probably know. So we both have a psychological dimension, and then we have the risk assessment dimension that the mentors and parent coaches work with. The method is primarily devolved to address universal issues. So the mentors and parent coaches are actually trained at working with a very different target group or a very different variety of people, but then they get this, you can call it an extra layer regarding specific concerns regarding extremism and working with prevention of this. So they have sort of an extra set of skills that they can use in working with these people. And you can say, well, regarding today's topic on gender, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot more about that later on, the preventive effort is in Denmark is, as in many other Western countries, are based upon knowledge and experiences from primarily men, and men who engage in extremist environments and groups and ideologies. And it's also based on needing to act when young men sought, for instance, to travel to Syria, or they sorry, I'm missing a word in my manuscript, sorry. When they sought to travel to Syria, or they do terrorist attacks, which we've seen in Denmark, both nationally and which we've also seen internationally. But we do have a constant awareness of the fact that prevention of extremism needs to look much broader. It needs to look at both men and women, and it needs to look at both left and right-wing extremism. And I'm pretty sure we're going to talk a lot more about this in the discussion.
Thank you, Aya, for this overview of the work that you're doing, and you already hinted some more details coming up later. Ich gebe jetzt das Mikrofon virtuell an Dr.
I'm now going to hand over the virtual microphone to Dr. Moldenhauer, who is a public prosecutor in the criminal division of the German Federal Constitutional Court. And he's going to give us an overview over German law enforcement. First of all, thank you very much for giving me the chance to give you a law enforcement point of view from the Federal Constitutional Court. This is good because the prevention of terrorism is essential for us. It is one of the most important pillars in our work of law enforcement. So this is great for me. It's a great chance for me to be here with you. Now, the next slide should pop up. There we go. The central standard in the law enforcement in Germany is, of course, the formation of a terrorist organization or group. So if you ask yourself, what is there at hand from the law enforcement? Is there any differentiation between men and women? I can first of all tell you that the central standard, law standard, if you're breaking it down in my input, I'm going to tell you this one. It says whoever forms an organization that is terrorist is subject to public prosecution. So this is a neutral one. However, looking at acts of exhibitionism, as you can see, this is only men who can actually be convicted. So only a man who vexes another person by exhibitioning himself and his body is subject to penalty. And as you know, in the law enforcement institutions, we are splitting up men and women. However, when it comes to terrorist organizations, we are always having a look at the type of contribution. So there are different classes. So there is one case, which is, for instance, the murder. The murder paragraph is the first one. The question is, does it exclude women, or is it misogynic? So one should ask themselves whether there are typical characteristics that would rather, well, they somehow pop up in terms of gender. So first of all, Alexander Ritzmann already said that about 20% of the returnees are women. They are, of course, every one of us is copying these figures, and as we do not have any empirical results, this is what we've copied from the same source, I guess. And of course, with the women, there are a lot of camp cases where we have issues proving whatever activity from the women's side. So we cannot go into the camps, and from the context, from the territory of the crisis and of the action, there is no public prosecution in place. And therefore, we are rather relying on facts that are being submitted to us. Now, when it comes to the forming of a terrorist group, we really have to have a look what these people did whilst in Syria. Therefore, we need to know exactly where this person has been located, situated in that or in the hierarchy of such a terrorist group, and also an active, an active action has to be proven in that respective terrorist group, or also the membership and some kind of battle group. So the battlefield evidence is required. And this is quite tricky when it comes to women. As we've just heard yesterday during the sentence that was made in Düsseldorf, where the proof of a membership in a terrorist group was undisputable of the respective convicted person. However, we really need to collect evidence which prove any kind of criminal action. So maybe also a deliberate travel into the country, or the marriage with an IS member, or also money transfers to the IS. So any kind of financial support that has been rendered, and therefore the German law enforcement faces some challenges and issues to prove the actual deeds and actions or crimes, as you, for instance, compared to proof that can be found on the internet, or also proof that would show that someone was using a weapon during that war. So if someone is a member of a terrorist group, of course, is violating their obligation to care and educate their children, so, or the breach of a duty of care and upbringing. So this is a gross neglect of the duty of care. And we heard that in the beginning, especially persons who left with their children did not only enter a terrorist group, but also are accused of putting their children at risk by bringing them into a civil war area and also putting it at a threat, and therefore grossly neglecting the duty of care, which also makes them subject to German law enforcement. So this is, first of all, the basic facts from my input, and I'm looking forward to the next ones. Thank you very much, Mr. Moldenhauer. These were very interesting perspectives that you've just presented. The figures that we're using come from the Federal Criminal Agency in Germany, based on the information extracted from biographies of returnees, but I would have to double check that figure, the 20%. But this is my knowledge as far as I'm concerned. Thank you very much for the first insights. We're going to come to in a few minutes into the details, and we're going to elaborate on that. But this was some kind of an appealing presentation. Ms. Schnaudt is the next to present. Ms. Schnaudt is a consultant at the Grenzgänger Association, and she's looking at the meaning of exclusion and also returnees and the work with children and youth. Ms. Schnaudt. Hi, thank you very much for the invitation, first of all, and let me thank also the previous speakers for their very interesting inputs and presentations. My name is Friederike Schnaudt. I am working with the IFAK e.V., which is a counseling network in Bochum. And this project has been advising and training in the field of religiously based extremism since 2012, and then combines relatives, social environment, affected persons, and institutions. The aim of my input today will be to tell you about our counseling practice, possible motives for clients to turn to us from our work, as well as to point out possible needs for gender-specific ways of working. First of all, I would like to say that counseling and accompanying customers is very different. Radicalization is a highly individual and complex process that can be caused and triggered by various factors. Therefore, it is all the more important to take a differentiated look at the cases in order to prevent stigmatization and hasty conclusions. It is a necessary, so the meaning of gender in radicalization processes and in prevention and exit work is essential, and it's also essential for the counselors to reflect on our own counseling perspective. So this is a repetitive process, so to say. In our work, we often experience that initial radicalization processes are accompanied by changes in clients' clear understandings of their roles and gender. And besides the differences, we also see a lot of overlappings when it comes to the behavior and experiences of young women, girls, but also older women, men and boys. When it comes to girls and young women, we see an excessive demand in a meritocracy. That means excessive demands to take on different roles, such as being a good student, a good job, becoming a good mother, care work, etc. Whereas in the Islamist scene, there is a very clear positive recognition of the role only as a mother and a wife, because it involves raising the next generation. I would also like to address the body image, the objectification of the female body, and the widespread ideal of body on platforms such as Instagram. We have had female clients who have experienced bullying because of their appearance and have sought and found recognition in the Islamist scene, where inner values would count, as you are beautiful as you are. And in this context, love bombing is a common online phenomenon. Showering someone with love, this is a form of emotional abuse, because the perpetrator, that means the love bomber, makes another person dependent on him or her and integrates them into the community. We also had clients who had experiences of sexual assault in their past and felt ashamed of that experience that they wanted to get rid of or strip off. Nothing last is the aestheticization of the veil, of the hijab, that is also a counter design to the discrimination in society. Special features for boys and young men need male role models, which are provided and are present online, and they are strong and have a certain represented image of masculinity. Also, a new start and the escape from an old life, for instance, possibly a criminal life, is an option. Or jihadism represents life as an adventurer and an action hero with the power and authority, which might be very attractive and appealing. Let me now come to the gender-specific working methods and counseling practice. The multi-professionalism and the diverse composition of our team, according in origin, religious affiliation, age, and gender prove to be very advantageous in the counseling process as well as in the assessment of gender-specific issues. It is especially important to reflect on the different representations as a counselor, both to become clear about one's own construction of reality and to become aware of one's own limits of perception, but also of your personal limits. What do I trigger in the client as the person I represent? How do I think about it, and why do I think this way? Motives for turning to others are often anchored in the biography, and systemic counseling can start exactly there. In addition, there are gender-specific issues in the counselor's practice. Consulting topics for men are, for instance, how can I de-radicalize and keep my masculinity in honor? For women, achieving independence and self-determination from their man is an essential topic. The independence from a man, the resource of women, children as a central marker for distancing. And there are also challenges and needs when it comes to the access to clients. How do we address women? But also an international view is important because radicalization can be a consequence of exclusion, experiences of discrimination, sexism, and racism. Therefore, we need an acceptance in the society. And we need to expand gender-specific approaches in prevention work and distancing work. We also need to create low threshold alternatives. And last but not least, the contact points in society have to be underlined and used as connecting factors. That's it from my side.